want to talk a little bit about financing innovation across borders, as Charnay greatly teed us up around. With the backdrop of all of the challenges we're facing in our ecosystem, in the social impact space, and just more broadly as people and planet, themes that I've heard over the course of SOCAP in the last few days, and just in general, is just acknowledgement of how interdependent we all are and how much we need to be coming together in collaboration and sort of collective thinking and action to really try to tackle the things that we're facing as collective humanity. And here this session is trying to shine a little bit of a light on what could that look like when we talk about financing these solutions, not about replication of solutions, but really about adaptation of solutions to local and regional contexts. And we have an amazing panel here of an entrepreneur, an investor, and an ecosystem builder who have experience doing just that. And I'm gonna, without further ado, pass it to them to introduce yourselves a bit to the group here, and also talk a little bit about the why. Why is this so important? Why is cross-border scaling important in your mind? Why has this become something that is core to the work that you each do? And what impact has it been able to unlock? Just briefly to get us kicked off. We can start in whatever order.
Sure, the ecosystem builder. So I'm Elizabeth. A year ago, I joined GSG Impact as the CEO. And GSG Impact, for those of you who are not familiar, is a network organization. Our job is to really help create impact economies across the globe. How do you put into place the systems, the infrastructure, the incentives that really unlock impact capital? And that means, how do you create a dynamic where positive impact is part of business, it's part of finance, it's part of government decision making. So our approach to this is to really help create, accredit, and to support local impact organizations around the globe. We started when the UK held the presidency of the G7 in 2013, and all of the G7 countries put into place social impact task forces that rippled 10 years later, 12 years later. We now have 43 national partners. And these are organizations that really, the governance of GSG Impact requires that they're very representative of the impact ecosystem. So the partnership represents the supply of capital, the demand for impact capital, the policymakers, the market builders, the intermediaries. So we now are, I think, very helpfully trying to unpack what are the regulatory, what are the policy opportunities that really enable impact capital across the globe. And I think the why for us is we really need to unlock impact capital. Not nearly enough of assets under management are going towards positive impact. And so we've been very focused on trying to unpack and then to adapt to different geographies what works on the regulatory and the policy side in particular.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Annie Theriault. I'm managing partner at Cross Border Impact Ventures, and I think the best answer I can give a little bit to this intro is to give you a bit of history on our firm. So Cross Border was really created out of my desire to do something impactful with my skill set. It was sort of at the cross of those two pieces. So I came to Grand Challenges Canada in 2018-19 with the goal of spinning out an investment firm in venture capital that focused on achieving the goal of improving health outcomes for women and children around the world. And it took us a little while to figure out where we could play in the great big market to achieve that kind of impact. And when we looked at all the things that we could do, we identified that if we focused on a market that was already underserved in North America and Europe, which is women and children's health, when you look statistically, it's about less than 2% of venture capital investing going to that segment. You also see that the pharma and medtech sector proportionately invests less there. So we saw that there was a gap there, which we read as an opportunity to have strong returns. married that with an area of need in global markets, which is exactly the same. We identified that this could be an interesting place to play with a cross-border strategy. Because medical devices and diagnostics require proportionately less contextualization than service delivery. And we know that the tools that are used today in the medical systems all over the world are suboptimal. So I'll give just one example that we're looking at today is, how to detect preeclampsia during pregnancy. So in developed markets, we had achieved pretty decent outcomes, not the best. Let's be very clear, it's not optimal at all. But we still see rates of mortality in the best health systems, which are in the Nordic countries, because of brute force. Essentially, we test a whole bunch of things. It's very expensive, very resource intensive, because we have all those other technologies. And but yet we could do things better. And what we're looking at for our next fund is an opportunity to invest in a medical device that uses a blood pressure analysis to detect the risk of preeclampsia for women. That technology can be used exactly in the same way, whether you're in Nairobi or in Toronto or in South Africa or in India. And so those are the kinds of things that we get excited about. And that's why we launched our fund with a cross-border strategy, because we felt that there was an opportunity for a return-driven strategy that achieved global impact. And that's sort of how we do things. It doesn't mean that we drop ship equipment. We recognize that there's a need to contextualize where the device is used in the standard of care, whether it's first line of defense, third line, and so on and so forth. The training will be different. You may need different packaging, explanations. But the proportionate contextualization is a little bit less in the segment that we've chosen to play.
Hi, and I am Gregory Rockson. I founded mPharma about 12 years ago with the aim of building a pharmacy-first primary care system in Africa, where we scaled the organization to working in 9 African countries, providing primary care to over 2 million patient visits a year. And this year I stepped down as CEO and I moved to the US to start a new company building a pharmacy-first rural health system in the US. And we are currently developing local provider networks across 15 rural counties in 15 states across the country. And for me, the why really actually stems partly in sort of 2 interactions that are not really linked, but sort of linked. First is that, I grew up in Ghana, moved to the US for college when I was 17, but I went to school in a small rural town in Missouri called Fulton. And whilst in Fulton, the only hospital we had closed down, part of the rural hospital closures the country is experiencing. And I tell people 15 years later, the hospital is still closed down. And so if you need to see a doctor in Callaway County, you have to go to either St. Louis or Columbia or Jeff City to see a doctor. But the insight for me there was when I began creating these wellness clinics in college by convincing one of the big hospitals in St. Louis to send nurses to a local pharmacy to do preventive health checks. It wasn't a business then. It was something I thought would be great if we could have people not wait to fall really sick to go to the ER. And that became sort of that journey to thinking through how do we imagine OPEX light, CAPEX light provider networks. And then I started mPharma when I graduated. And in coming back to the US to build Pharmacy First, in many ways, the why, which is kind of interesting, is, a couple of months ago, I was in Cumberland, part of rural Maryland, and I'd gone to visit one of the oldest rural pharmacies in the county, Allegheny County. And while I was there, you might have these conversations around, what are the healthcare challenges the community is facing. And it was right around the same time when there was also the big disruptions with USAID, and there was this big focus around, hey, it's just less than 1% of the US budget, all of that. But then I found a very different context to that, in the sense that when I was in Cumberland, I met patients who were telling me, they don't have $20 to take transportation to go see a doctor, or they can't even get food. And if you are that person in Cumberland who doesn't have $20 to get transportation to go see a doctor, it doesn't matter that the U.S. foreign assistance budget is less than 0.1%. For you, it is billions of dollars leaving your country to another country, whilst your government can find you $20 to go see a doctor. And that for me was a big disconnect, because from an intellectual standpoint, yes, we could rationalize why cutting the U.S. foreign assistance budget is dumb. But for U.S. voters who are angry that they are not getting what they need, it makes sense. And it was at a point when I realized that, if I sort of took myself out of my own interest, because obviously it affects my home country with the USAID cuts, that we need to find solutions. If you're going to convince people that it makes sense for the US government to spend taxpayer money to support other countries, you have to convince them that it's in their interest as well. And part of what we do is hopefully showing that what we built in Africa, we could replicate and adapt those models to help solve problems in Cumberland, in Bastion, in Gold Hill, in Mifflintown, and that we are all connected in this ecosystem of challenges.
Thank you all. The Skoll Foundation has the pleasure of partnering with each of the organizations that these leaders represent. And we see the tensions that are balanced every day in the work that you all do. I'm going to ask each of you just to dive in a little bit deeper on how you go about doing this cross-border scaling. And so, Gregory, I'm going to start with you. You just shared with us, a bit of your journey around scaling within multiple countries in Africa, mPharma, and then now bringing that innovation here in the United States. Why do you think we don't see more of this kind of scaling? And what are some of the barriers that you've had to overcome?
The first one is like $1 billion question to answer. Why don't we see that? I think there's been a general conception that in many ways innovation goes one way, mostly from the West to the South. And in fact, a lot of the times when I remember when I moved back and we started doing our work, I think it was one of the bigger shocks, But then, a bigger shock for a lot of my friends in DC. But then again, on my trip to Mifflintown, which is again rural Pennsylvania, and I was there, obviously talking about why we are here, why we are making investments in the local community through that local pharmacy. And on my second trip, apparently, folks had gone and read about my work online, and so I go back and they're like, "Wow. You did all of that in Africa. We sure need that here," because in their mind, they're like, and I realized that if living in Accra, I had better healthcare than someone who lives in Mifflintown, in Pennsylvania, to be honest, which was the craziest thing to, live in the richest country in the world and to have this sharp contrast between, someone's healthcare access in Mifflintown versus living in a poor country in Ghana, and at least in the capital, having better access to that. And so I think it's just been generally the feeling that, there's this transfer of capital where it is much easier to get capital in the West and go solve problems, in the South than getting capital from the South to come solve problems in the West. But I think what I think flips it is actually thinking about what made it easier for me to do what I did and raise the capital to do what we're doing here in the US was less thinking about from a capital challenge to more of the work, what do you call it, sort of a fitness, a profile and sort of fitness. I remember one of our big investors said, well, what you did in Africa, if there's anyone to go build stuff in rural America, it's you. And because they saw it from, okay, you have had to build things in some of the toughest places here, and obviously solving these problems here in rural communities is a tough challenge, but you need someone with a profile who has lived through those experiences to do that. And I think, thinking about my role from, okay, I have built the experience and the talent to actually be able to adapt to whatever challenges our experience building in rural communities, actually flip the conversation from a capital challenge to more of, okay, are you the right personality and profile to be able to build this? In terms of challenge, obviously, for me personally, to be candid, I work in extremely very rural communities, very conservative communities. We tend to joke that if we could talk about true melting pot of what a country represents, to be taking the communities that we serve and my profile going into those communities to serve. But what has been exciting about doing that work is, regardless of, how I look and the communities that we serve, we just focus on the problems. And everyone says, well, we need healthcare. We don't care who brings us healthcare. We need healthcare. And so even if the politics of the day would make it seem as if I going into such communities will not be welcomed, I actually have been more than welcomed working in these communities out there. So it was something I thought would be a challenge, but hasn't really been a challenge. I think the bigger challenge for us is obviously working within the broader policy changes that we are seeing with sort of the Medicaid and Medicare changes that we hopefully will see coming forward, and what that means for folks that majority get their health benefits through these government health plans.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. Have you in this process come across any unexpected partners and supporters that you wouldn't have foreseen?
Yes.
Building on this community connection.
Yes. I give a good example. In Oregon, we're building our provider network in a small town called Gold Hill. Just about 1,500 people live in Gold Hill. And, again, I had never been to Gold Hill. I just showed up one day and said, well, guess what? I've bought your local pharmacy and I'm going to turn it into a federally qualified health center. But I didn't know anyone there. And I just started asking for introductions to folks. And I said, I want this to be a community-led clinic. And so we said, we will build a board. And I remember the owner, Alex, who is 80 years old, said, Greg, give me 24 hours. I flew back to DC, and in my inbox was just names of 6 people who have all agreed to join the community board. And I think it's one of the best decisions that we made, in the sense that I just love showing up every month and talking to these community members who are like 80 years old, 70 years old. I'm like the youngest person in this board. And, just last week we had a board meeting, and we said, we need to hire a nurse practitioner. And the next day I get a call from one of the board members saying, my daughter's friend's husband is a nurse practitioner, and I think I can convince him to leave his job and move and come work for the clinic. And so I think, forming this, and I live in DC, and forming this sort of community connection has made it so easy, because it feels like the community is just building the clinic, and I'm just providing the financial resources to the community for them to do it.
Awesome, thank you. Annie, over to you. As an investor who has, you shared scaled solutions in different markets and different contexts, you chose very intentionally, even the name of your fund is called Cross-Border Impact Ventures. Why do you think that more investors and funders aren't sort of leaning in this direction. What are the challenges there? And share a bit of the successes that you've had as an example.
A lot to unpack there. I think the why is why more investors aren't doing it is pretty simple. I think the typical venture capital model is, we're on a time clock. From the day we make the investment, we have 3 to 6 years to exit. And so the most common approach has been focus, 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 achieve the minimum that you can do for the minimum money possible to achieve an exit that's attractive for your investors. And so you're constantly racing. And this has been done in this way for years and years and years. And so why more investors aren't doing it is just because that's just not the normal way, whatever normal means. But we came at it with a different mindset and a lot of passion for achieving global impact. And so I think it's just maybe the roots of the organizations that are doing the investing. So I think we do our due diligence twice. One for the U.S. market and the European market, and then we go beyond that and we do diligence in some emerging markets, and those may differ for companies, but often we've been sort of focused on 4 or 5 countries, and in Africa we focus a lot on India, and we're adding a bit of an emphasis on Latin America recently. It's harder. It's a lot of extra work, so that's probably part of the answer as well. The second piece I would say is it's got to be the mandate. So our investors, along the way when I was starting to raise capital for our first fund, I remember speaking to a very prominent impact investor for a very big Swiss bank. And he said, well, couldn't you not call your firm an impact investment firm? I think you'd do better in this way. Well, we did a bit of soul searching, and we're like, well, actually, we really only want investors that invest in our funds because they're driven by the impact, because we know we're going to work really hard. And I never want any of my investors to come at me and say, well, we really think you should focus on just the U.S. market, because that's just not who we are and that's not what we want to achieve. So I think part of it is you have to, if as a foundation, as an asset owner, you want to achieve impact with your money, globally, you have to pick a team to manage that capital intentionally, and that's really passionate about this work, because it's a lot of extra work. The second piece, when you're looking at barriers, methodology, and success stories, how we're sort of thinking about these things is really from the perspective of the individuals that are going to use the tools we finance are participants in the healthcare system. And so we would never bring a tool from France to the US or from the US to France without studying that market and understanding how that medical device or diagnostic tool is going to be used. Is it going to be used at the pharmacy, at the medical clinic, in the hospital? And you'd be surprised, even between 2 developed markets, it's different. It's not always the same. So some, and I'll give an example. If I look at, we have an investment in Day, and they have a lot of different technologies, but one that I'm particularly fond of is using the diagnostic tampon, which is a tampon that has a few modifications to it to test for HPV, for cancer prevention for women. And that's essentially to replace or complement the Pap test depending on the health system. In the UK, you can go online and order this product. It comes to your home. You wear the tampon for 20 minutes in the privacy of your home, and then ship it back through the mail and get the diagnostic result. There are also evolving to now work with the NHS, their national healthcare system, where you'll now be able to order it from the clinic. I think I've lost the mic here. But it's okay. Oh, hello? Okay. Yes. Yeah, perfect. And now they're coming into the US with their products, and they're going to be sold through gynecologist clinics and other medical clinics. We're also at the same time working to prove out the technology in Nigeria and doing some clinical validation there to explore whether women are interested in using the product and figuring out how it's going to be delivered. Is it going to be through community healthcare workers? Are we going to partner with local femtech companies that can offer something similar? So you really have to kind of study the healthcare system. The tool itself doesn't need a lot of modification. I mean, it is what it is. It's a medical device. It goes in the same body part of women, in whether you're in Lagos or whether you're in Toronto. But how and where women are going to access this product is going to be different from each market, and you can't really bring these tools in the market without kind of studying that market and talking to medical practitioners and getting buy-in and having local individuals, whether it's in France or in Nigeria, really put their footprint on how the product is going to be used and delivered. So those are sort of some of the challenges that we work on. And of course, there's a money challenge. You know, we're investors after all. For each and everything that you do, you need investment capital, but you also need a little bit of grant capital for some of the harder to reach populations. And there's no way around that. Not everything is investable. Of course, when you serve middle income people or high income people, you don't necessarily need that. But if you want to reach to harder to reach communities, then you need a little bit of that advocacy. And that's true of any market, by the way. Even in the UK, where this company is based, you have public money that is coming in. So it's not exactly a grant from a foundation, but it's still the same nature of capital that is not return-seeking to reach harder to reach communities.
Yeah, and actually on that point, can you share a little bit, you said it's harder, you move with more intent, you move intentionally with the team, with the funders who really are in that, share that intention and that approach. But you also raise, capital, to your point, around technical assistance. And can you talk a little bit about that structure and the role it's played?
So when we started in this business, our first fund, we didn't have technical assistance capital. And to just show how difficult that could be to get some of that grant funding, we had one company take 2.5 years to bring in $250,000 to run a small clinical validation study. So for Fund 2, we're, I think, being a bit, with the goal of going faster on impact. We've discussed it with our investors, and a number of them will, provide about 10% of top up to their investment to be used as technical assistance. And our goal there is really to say, okay, so when we go to a new market where the economics are still unclear, you always need to do that, a little bit of contextualization that I was talking about. And so that's really the use of funds, is to be used in the local market, not to be funded to our portfolio companies. And the idea is to get companies to put a bit of skin in the game from the equity check, put a lot of elbow grease behind it and knowledge and thinking, and at the same time have some grant capital that can be used in the local markets for these sort of early commercialization, whatever that means. So sometimes it's clinical validation, sometimes it's focus group type work with medical practitioners, but definitely it's something that's needed for our strategy to have a little bit of that technical assistance capital.
Thank you. Elizabeth, coming to you as you shared, trying to build ecosystems with national partners around impact investing and trying to unlock more of the capital in these local contexts, but globally across across borders. Where are you seeing sort of some of that friction still that you're still hitting against as you try to sort of push for this? And where are you also seeing some of the bright spots around things that are actually starting to shift that current equilibrium?
Sure. We come at this from very different places, and it's a tribute to the Skoll Foundation to bring us all together to make these connections. But from where I sit, sort of running and helping to manage a network of impact investing organizations around the globe, we have learned very specifically that markets alone are not going to be the solution to unlock impact capital, that we really do need regulation, and capital is abundant. I was listening this summer when there was a new head of the African Development Bank appointed, and he said very clearly, Africa needs capital, and Africa has capital. There's more than 1.3 trillion in African pension funds. But the challenge is, how do you enable the barriers of legal reform? And we know what works. We've seen really successful pension reform. In our network, we've seen very successful changes to dormant bank asset laws to put those assets to work for impact, changes to public finance to sort of enable governments to be able to invest in impact. So we have sort of cataloged and seen what works, but it's not always that easy to adapt these to different markets and contexts. Our Dutch national partner has been quite an inspiration for much of our network. They created the 10% target program, and they really worked to survey the institutional investor landscape in the Netherlands and to start to identify where were the key barriers and why were these assets not being put to work more specifically for employment, for other impact outcomes. And they learned very clearly that there are significant barriers. There wasn't clear deal flow pipeline. There was not clarity on the definitions of impact. There was no sort of standardized way to measure, to manage, to report, and disclose on impact. So these were some of the clear barriers that they went to work to solve for. And this 10% target program is something that it really has mobilized institutional investors in the Netherlands so that 10% of assets under management are now being put to work for impact. And today, Dutch pension funds collectively manage 75 billion in impact-focused assets, and this is more than all of EU overseas development assistance. So it's super. We've been having these aha moments across our network. How can we use these inspirations? And I'm happy to say that this Dutch experience has very much translated to some of our countries in Africa and our national partners. And I don't see anyone here, but I know the head of our national partner from Ghana is here, Greg, you should meet her. But anyway, that example of what's been so successful in the Netherlands is now actually being put to work very successfully in Ghana. In April, at the very end of April this year, the Pension Commission in Ghana has enabled 5% of their assets to be invested in alternative, 5% of their assets under management to be invested into impact. And so our national partner has helped to originate a new fund of funds, Chigaba, where 30% is very catalytic capital, but 70% is institutional capital from local pensions. And this $75 million fund is very specifically designed to support small and medium enterprises in Ghana. And we're seeing the same kind of ripple effect. Nigeria is working hard with its National Pension Commission to enable a fund-to-fund structure. And then in other contexts, we've been quite historically with the Global Steering Group for Impact, we started focusing in the UK on dormant assets, how to unlock those bank those bank assets to put them to work for social housing and for other impact causes. That had a ripple effect throughout our network. And then today what I'm seeing, which I find not surprising given fiscal austerity and tightening, we're seeing a bit of a resurgence in outcome-based financing. The UK, our national partner, the Impact Investing Institute, just launched a £500 million outcomes fund that's very focused on about 200,000 youth, children, very vulnerable children. And this will be matched by another £500 million. So this is, we're seeing kind of an opportunity to innovate around financial structures, to unlock impact capital. And for us, it's really that how do you adapt what's been successful, often in a developed market, and apply that to a less developed market? But that works both ways, right? We see what's happened with the success of the Ghana Pension Commission has inspired the Nigerian Pension Commission. So it's not just north-south.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to audience questions, which I've already gotten some in a minute on these cards, and there's more cards available if there are others who want to ask questions of this panel. But before we do that, you all come from such different vantage points, as Elizabeth you were mentioning, but all really driving cross-border innovation and scaling of innovations in your own ways. You have a group of funders, entrepreneurs, doers, change makers, movement leaders here in the room. What would be one thing that you would ask of them, recommend, suggest, as we try to see more of this kind of innovation get unlocked, and in whatever order?
I want Elizabeth to come talk to the Canadian pension funds. To just tell you how conservative they are. They told me they needed 6 fully exited funds before it was worth me talking to them. That's my children will talk to them. I think, one of the messages I would have for asset owners is to there's two barriers we see. I spend a lot of my time doing our fundraising, and to just give you a sense of how long it takes to raise this kind of fund. We conceived the idea for a fund in 2019, had the first close in 2021, and the final close in 23 for our first fund. And our second fund, really, I started to conceive it early in 23, because I knew as we were closing the first that it would take me this long to get to our first close in 25, right? So I do think, particularly for social impact funds, it's a little more challenging for us because there's so much capital going towards climate. And climate is kind of climate at the end of the day. It's tons of CO2, it's efficiency plays. But social impact, it seems like it always takes a little pocket out of the climate bucket. And it seems like also it gets parsed. Sometimes I joke around a little bit that, certain foundations, when we talk to them, they want to impact the blue people that live on the 3rd mountain, but not the 4th mountain, and certainly not the green people. It's just to express how, when I talk to an investor, I try to target the endowment, not the programs, because the endowment tends to be a bit more flexible, and the endowment tends to be invested more in the same way that asset selection is generally made with respect to what I mean by that. It's, you have a global return target and you want to hit a number of priorities, and diversity is valued, whereas on the program side, it's a little bit tougher. So all this to say, really encouraging, particularly for those foundations and asset owners that do want to see social impact, to be a little bit flexible in how that impact is being defined, because it otherwise locks out so many strategies that are interesting.
I think for me, one of the key messages, but it's also something that I've had to do for myself, is that with all the disruptions that we are seeing, and development assistance, foreign aid, it is easy for us to point fingers to those doing the disruption to say, why are you doing this? But I think that we, on the other side, that believe in the importance of social impact and foreign assistance, probably also need to spend some time doing a bit of introspection and ask ourselves if the work we were doing was really, really transformative. Why did so many people vote against it? Why did so many people choose the other alternative that clearly was not going to be in support of the work that we believe in? Because I think it is easy for us to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But I think moments of disruption are also moments of opportunity for us to ask ourselves, what could we do different? What could we do better? Because if we want to win more people on our side, then obviously we need to provide a compelling vision of the future that basically aligns with what they believe in. And I think just sitting back and having that introspection, part of what actually helped me make a decision to move back here to work in rural counties across the country, sort of part of my introspection led me to do that.
And so I think my ambition would be, we know what good looks like, and how can we make impact policy and economic policy more aligned and more understood? And so we're working hard. Just now we're launching a new project to really build an impact economy index. This is something that would be really for governments, but how do you, to measure, to rank, to compare countries' enabling environments for unlocking impact capital. And so this is kind of an exciting new project that we're keen to put into place. We'll be working with the London School of Economics as some of that thought leadership, but we have learned over 10 years what good looks like. If it's incentives that need to be in place to enable social enterprise acceleration, if it's some of what I discussed around, unlocking domestic sources of capital, if it's, really doubling down on transparency to give impact, to give investors the confidence they need. We absolutely know what good sustainability disclosure looks like. So across, the enabling environment, we would like to sort of put out for the public and to really help rank countries and have a race to the top by building this kind of index. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got a great number of questions here. We're going to start with you, Elizabeth, actually. One directed at you. As a part of the impact ecosystem, but not a part of local governments, how do you start the process of influencing public policy shifts?
So as I mentioned, to be sort of recognized as a national partner of the Global Steering Group for Impact, policy needs to be very much part of the national partner. And so there is representation in our local chapters that are able to have that necessary influence on policymakers.
Okay, great. And so for Greg and any others who want to talk about this, are there any innovative financing mechanisms you've deployed or received that have been especially fit for purpose? What has typically shown to be the best financing structure or mechanism?
Happy to take this. So I started my career as a financial engineer before 2008. So for those of us who were working in financial systems then, it got very, very creative. So I'm a big advocate of keep it simple. And structures that I really like, if you're financing a social enterprise with debt in the Global South, 10-year low-interest loan is awesome. That is the simplest structure that is out there. And I love that structure. We see it, and where have I seen it work really well, actually, is in the U.S. There's these, forget what it stands for, but SBA loans. They used to exist, small business loans. And, along the way in my career, I was part of a high-yield lender. Whenever we got refinanced by an SBA loan, which was typically 7-8%, 10 years, so it looked a lot like a mortgage, these businesses would thrive when they could get rid of us with that kind of loan. So I'm a big proponent of that for the Global South, for social enterprises. They tend to grow well, a lot of these enterprises, particularly in healthcare, will have kind of a longer growth pathway, and so that time frame tends to work. For our fund, what's worked well for us is we have a layered fund, so we have two classes of interest, one that is concessionary, and that's allowed us to be, as a first-time fund manager, we raised $90 million for a women's health fund, which doesn't sound like a lot in the context of the opportunity. But the majority of our colleagues raise $30 to $50 million funds. And so just having that layer of funding from the government of Canada and the government of Germany has allowed us to have a bigger fund. So that's another structure that I really like, just having two layers. Equity for, we invest, I again, very simple tools that have been used for years and years and years. Preferred shares work really well in venture, and there's no need to reinvent them. So I would say from my side, what I really like is to keep it very simple and standard. What we do is unique, but we like to do it in a way that investors understand, co-investors understand. Grants are great, they are needed. So rather than having really sophisticated instruments, which may sound very counterintuitive from a financial engineer's point of view, keeping it very simple and streamlined is just a good way to go, and having transparency between investors and investees, wherever you play in the structure.
Awesome. Anybody want to add anything to that? Shall I move on? Okay. So this question is about balancing and how to best balance the localization and proximate leadership and action with the need for centralized platforms, process, standards, especially with investment requiring that globally, sort of standardized compliance. How do you do that?
Yeah, he said, I think that problem shows up more in the kind of work you do in terms of service delivery.
Yeah. We're sort of...
Even as you go from rural community to rural community, how do you... Yeah.
So,
Yes, yeah.
Because I think from I think it's quite hard to centralize, different continents, different time, like that. I would not advise. It makes no sense in that sense. But for us, also just two separated companies. The link is I'm a founder of both, and we've had really great leadership at the mPharma level. That one of the things that was actually extremely beneficial when I moved to build this is that we kept our engineering team locally. So I was actually able to build another engineering team in Ghana to actually do all the engineering work that we need to do here in the US for our software development. And obviously, that is great from being able to even continue to create more jobs in the local markets. But as it speaks to like centralization, I always say it's, healthcare is local, at least in the context of what I do. Healthcare is extremely local. And at the end of the day, our biggest challenge in building in rural markets here, I was joking to someone I was trying to hire as to lead talent that I think hiring clinicians and convincing them to move to Mifflintown or Gold Hill is harder than hiring an AI engineer right now. Because really getting people to move to rural communities in the US to deliver care is so hard. I probably spend the majority of my time on the phone. Actually, one of the things that made me so happy yesterday was that, on Friday, I was trying to convince a pharmacist to move to Mesik. It's a village in Michigan. Just 400 people live in Mesik. And they've had this one pharmacy there for the last 50 years. And the owner, Bill, is 78 years old. He's retiring. When we get figure out a solution to Bill retiring, because if we don't figure out a solution, there'll be no pharmacist and the pharmacy will close down, and it's the only healthcare provider in the entire village. And so I got a phone number of a pharmacist, Jessica, and I was trying to add a call with her. I'd already been told she probably wouldn't join. I was like, let me still call her and try and see what I can do. And she did confirm that, she probably still can join. And then yesterday she texted me. She's like, I just am thinking over the weekend and I think I can come on board. And I was like, wow, whenever I get that done, I'm like so happy. So I think, I have realized that actually focusing more on localization is more important than starting with centralization. I think if you can do localization really well, then as you scale, you start figuring out, okay, what are some of the back office staff that you can centralize. But I think trying to start from centralization from the get-go, when you've not figured out your local structures, is probably not the right approach to take.
Awesome. The next question builds on what you're talking about from like a technology, AI perspective. What is the role of technology in effective impact investment? And what about AI?
I'm not sure if that's where the question is going, but, I use AI to monitor my email, use AI to do our research. Hannah, who's, does our impact analysis, uses it a ton. So where we use it is to try to be as efficient as we can in our processes, and it's making us faster and more efficient. The other place where it plays is, of course, a lot of the technologies that we invest in, particularly on the medical device side. We're seeing more and more, pretty well every product we look to invest in has some component of machine learning or AI, either in the development of the new technology or in some cases integrated, so that I hate to use buzzwords, but precision medicine is really truly becoming real now with the new evolution of products that we see. What we have to, of course, be cautious. I think it is absolutely true that when you look at any kind of technology developed with AI and machine learning, you need to ensure that the data going in is diverse and so on and so forth. So that's another aspect that we pay attention to. So hopefully I addressed the question.
And I think as we work to measure and to rank and to compare enabling environments for impact economies, AI will be a hugely useful component of that analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from the audience for the group is, how can nonprofits and social enterprises prepare and attract impact investment? Prepare and attract? What are some tips or thoughts or advice you have?
I think from my point of view I'm a big proponent of right capital for right type of business. So we do venture. So again, we're very limited. I have to a certain risk return time profile that we need to stick with. So that's what I can invest in. But there's other investors out there that have different risk reward time impact profiles. So being very clear on the business model that you're going after as a nonprofit, and also don't be afraid to mix the capital. So for example, when I worked at Grand Challenges Canada, I ran the Every Woman, Every Child Innovation Marketplace. And one of the companies we work with was a nonprofit enterprise that had a medical device side to the business, but and it was a very complicated piece of equipment. It was to automate anesthesia and how you monitored the patient's breathing, the amount of drugs that are needed, very sophisticated stuff. They were present in 20 markets in Africa, some of the lowest resource settings, and it was just a really, truly amazing business. But when we did the financial analysis, it was clear that this wasn't a venture-backable business. And what really was needed was a component of grant and a component of debt, long-term debt. And it worked very, very well. And so we essentially were the double checker for the business, because at some point they were like, oh, should we raise venture capital? And we looked and we said, no, this really doesn't work for venture. And really tried to work on their business model to have this sort of two layers of financing, one that would always be grant for to fund the training, the translation of the training videos, work sessions, whatever they needed to do there as a companion to the sale of the equipment. The sale of the equipment in itself had a high margin, even in low resource setting at a fair price. And so it's just, I think, being a little bit creative and clear and understanding that if there's a piece of your business that requires grants, it is what it is. If you're serving very low income populations, there's a use case for a bit of grant with the social enterprise part of the nonprofit. So that would be my advice.
Okay, maybe just real quick rapid fire because we're heading to the end of time. We're not going to get through all the questions, but actually, Annie, coming back to you, can you talk about exits? Does the exit strategy differ for the portfolio companies that you work with than, as an audience member asked for, then versus sort of maybe non-impact oriented funds? What are typical exit strategies for your investments?
So there's a component that's very much the same. The majority of our companies will exit through an M&A transaction. They'll be bought by, Philips, Medtronic, Merck. So one of the component is very, very standard M&A strategy. The component that's a little different is all our companies sign an impact pledge with our firm, where if they don't achieve a certain impact goals within our holding period, there can be a financial gift provided to achieve that impact. And or, because sometimes we go to a hybrid solution, which in the case of Sonia we've done, the buyer will retain some of the commitments. And so what looks a little different is that, other than in a typical M&A structure, you'll have a bit of an earn-out, so you need to monitor maybe a year or two. In our case, we'll often have to monitor 3 to 4 years and continue to have discussions with the exited team and or their buyer about impact going forward. And, it's really exciting because we see how, maybe the plan was to not really integrate the technology into the new product line, but over the course of time, through the conversations, we're often hopeful that, the technology can be scaled by the buyer, which, typically, not always, but typically the buyers are the best parties to scale. Sometimes it will be a partner. So in our case, in a lot of markets, we're going to work with our companies to set up long-term B2B relationships with local distributors. So we're hopeful there that, post-exit, those contracts can remain so that it just looks like a new client. So there's no reason whatsoever to cancel the fact that Kenya's buying a lot of a medical device or Ghana's buying a lot of a medical device. So that's the slight difference, but it's not really all that different.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up, but I'm just going to, 2 of these that are remaining questions that we didn't get to, I think I'm just going to name as audience members' contributions. One audience member following on Greg, what you said around resistance is that it seems like attuning to people's anxieties, ambivalence, and aspirations is a key piece of doing this work as we try to understand and center local communities and localize solutions across borders. And then the other comment, which was a question, but I think is a call to action for all of us, is those that we need to partner with as we look to scale innovations across borders. Many of them are not here in this room today, so how can we each be bridges to those that aren't in this room and bring some of the insights and perspectives from here and that orientation